Hello, my name is Amanda Fox, and this is my presentation on the eye. Alrighty, so starting with the accessory structures of the eye, we're going to start with the eyebrows. They're short, coarse hairs that are above the supraorbital margins of the skull. And then we have the eyelids, the palpebrae, separated by the palpebral fissure, meets at the medial and lateral angles of the eye. They are thin, skin covered folds supported by connective tissue sheets called tarsal plates. Those anchor to the orbicularis or oculi and levator palpebrae superioris muscles that work within the eyelid. A fun fact is the medial commissure has almost a fleshy elevation called the lacrimal caruncle, and it contains sebaceous and sweat glands to produce a whitish, oily secretion, and they call it the Sandman's eye, sand. And then moving on to eyelashes, it's the free margin of the eyelid. They are follicles that are hair follicle receptors, and anything that touches the eyelash, even a puff of air, triggers the reflex blinking. And then the tarsal glands embedded in the tarsal plates, and their ducts open at the eyelid edge. And then just posterior to the eyelash, it creates an oily secretion and lubrication that the eyelid and the eye, between the eyelid and the eye, that prevents them from sticking together. And then the modified sweat glands called ciliary glands lie between those hair follicles. And then moving to conjunctiva, it's a transparent mucous membrane. It lines the eyelid as the palpebral conjunctiva and folds over the interior surface of the eyeball. The bulbar conjunctiva, which only covers the white of the eye, it's very thin, and the blood vessels are seen clearly within it. The lacrimal apparatus consists of the lacrimal gland and the ducts that drain lacrimal secretions into the nasal cavity. The lacrimal gland lies in the orbit above the lateral end of the eye and is visible through the conjunctiva when the lid is averted. It releases a dilute saline solution called lacrimal secretion, or tears, and it releases in the superior part of the conjunctional sac through excretory ducts. And then lastly, extrinsic eye muscles, the lateral rectus, which moves the eye laterally, the medial rectus, which moves the eye medially, and the superius rectus, which elevates the eye and turns it medially, the inferior rectus, which depresses the eye and turns it medially, the interior oblique, which elevates the eye and turns it laterally, and the superior, which depresses the eye and turns it laterally. Okay, so starting with the first layer, the fibrous layer, it's a dense avascular connective tissue located within is the sclera and the cornea. The sclera forms the posterior portion and the bulk of the fibrous layer. It's the glistening white and opaque. It provides a sturdy anchoring site for extrinsic eye muscles. Posteriorly, where the sclera is pierced by the optic nerve, or the second cranial nerve, and it's continuous with the dura mater, the brain. The cornea, or the anterior, is where the interiorly sits of the fibrous layer. It's modified to form the transparently and bulges interiorly from its junction with the sclera. It allows light to enter the eye and is a major part of the light bending situation of the eye. Moving on to the vascular layer, it forms in the middle of the eyeball and is the pigmented layer. It has three regions: the choroid, ciliary body, and the iris. The choroid is the blood vessel-rich dark brown membrane that forms the posterior 5/6 of the vascular layer. Its blood vessels nourish all the eye layers. The brown pigment is produced by melanocytes, which help absorb light, preventing it from scattering and reflecting within the eye. That would cause visual confusion. The choroid has posterior openings where the optic nerve leaves the eye, but interiorly speaking, the choroid becomes the ciliary body. It is a thickened ring of tissue that encircles the lens and is made up of three parts. The ciliary muscle, which makes up most of the ciliary body and consists of interlacing smooth muscle bundles that control the lens shape. And then the ciliary processes, which is near the lens at the posterior surface of the ciliary body and has these radiating folds that secrete the fluid that fills the cavity of the anterior segment of the eye. and then the ciliary zonule, which extends from the ciliary processes to the lens. This encircles the circumference of the lens and helps hold it in an upright position to transmit tension from the ciliary body to the lens. And then in this is the iris. It's the colored part of the eye. It is the most interior portion of the vascular layer. It lies between the cornea and the lens and is continuous with the ciliary body posteriorly. It is round. It allows the light to enter the eye. It's made up of two smooth muscle layers of elastic fibers that congeal into random patterns. Okay, moving on to the inner layer, it's the retina, which develops a form of extension of the brain and contains millions of photoreceptors that convert light energy, other neurons involved in processing responses to light, and it consists of two layers, an outer pigmented layer and an inner neural layer, which only the neural layer of the retina plays a role in vision, the rods and the cones. And then the rods are dim light and peripheral vision receptors. There are more rods than cones, and rods are more sensitive to light than the cones, but they do not provide really a sharp image of color vision. This is kind of why colors disappear and the edges of the object appear fuzzy in dim light and at the edge of our visual field. The cones are our vision receptors for bright light and provide high-resolution color vision. Okay, so moving on to more of a microscopic anatomy of the eye. We were going through the layers, but this is kind of a big overview. One of the key elements is the optic nerve. It is formed by axons of the ganglion cells. The nerve leaves the back of the eyeball at the optic disc. When light enters the eye, it passes through the retina, exiting the photoreceptor cells, which are known as rods and cones, and then the rods are cylindrical cells that are incredibly sensitive to light. Those make up about 95% of the photoreceptors in our eyes, but we have around 100 to 125 million. These cells are primarily responsible for low light and night vision, also known as scotopic vision. They allow us to see in dimly lit places, but they don't provide a clear perception of fine details of colors. But cones are photoreceptors with a cone-like shape. They enable vision in bright light and are responsible for color vision. There are 3 types of cones, each sensitive to different wavelengths of light: blue, red, and green. These cones are more prevalent in the macula, the part of the retina responsible for central vision. Once the rods and cones are stimulated, they generate signals. These signals represented by the gray arrow in this picture, and then they flow in the opposite direction via bipolar and ganglion cells. And then another big part of the retina is the pigmented layer. This layer is a single cell thick lining located next to the choroid. It extends anteriorly to cover the ciliary body and the posterior face of the iris. The layer plays a vital role in absorbing light and preventing it from scattering within the eye, and then ensuring that we have a clear vision. Also, the pigmented layer also acts as phagocytes, participating in the renewal of photoreceptor cells. It also stores vitamin A. We need that, and we need that for the photoreceptor cells to function correctly, and kind of the overall process of vision involves this complex interplay of various components that what I just mentioned. Okay, now we're going to move a little bit more specifically on how our eye focuses light through the retina. So as light passes from air and eye, it moves through the cornea, aqueous humor, lens, and vitreous humor, and then it passes through the entire neural layer of the retina to excite those photoreceptors that I talked about earlier that are next to the pigmented layer. During passage, light is bent 3 times, entering the cornea, entering the lens, leaving the lens. The cornea accounts for most of the refractory power of the eye. However, the refractory power of the cornea is consistent. On one hand, the lens are highly elastic. The curvature of it and the light bending power can actively change to allow fine focusing. For focusing for distant vision, light from an object at or kind of beyond the far point of vision approaches the eye at a parallel ray, and the cornea at rest lens focus the light from the distant objects precisely on the retina. For close vision, it forces the eye kind of to make adjustments and for the eyes to restore focus. 3 processes must occur when the lens are making accommodations, or that's the first step, accommodation of the lenses, construction of the pupils, and convergence of the eyeballs. Moving back to those photoreceptors, they go through different phases with the phototransduction, which is the process when the light energy is converted into a graded receptor potential. It begins when the visual pigment captures a photo of light. And then it moves to the photoreceptors and bipolar cells. Kind of unlike many other neurons, photoreceptors and bipolar cells don't generate action potentials. Instead, they generate graded potentials. Photoreceptors generate receptor potentials, and bipolar cells generate excitatory and inhibitory postsynaptic potentials. And then retinal and opsins. The key to this is kind of the process and the light-absorbing molecule called retinol. Retinol combines with proteins called opsins and to form 4 types of visual pigments. Depending on the type of opsin to which it's bound, retinol absorbs different wavelengths of the visible spectrum. Alrighty, I know I talked previously about the different signals that the eyes have to the brain, but it starts kind of with the optic tracts. They're paired structures that send most of their axons to synapse with neurons in the lateral geniculate nuclei of the thalamus. They maintain the fiber separation established at the chiasma and balance and combine the retinal input for delivery to the visual cortex. The visual cortex are axons of the thalamic neuron project through the internal capsule to form the optic radiation of fibers in the cerebral white matter. Those fibers project to the primary visual cortex in the occipital lobes, where conscious perception of the visual image occurs. And then the midbrain connection are where the sum of the nerve fibers in the optic tract send branches to the midbrain. One set ends in the superior colliculi, where they control the extrinsic muscles of the eye. Another set comes from a subset of ganglion cells in the retina that contain the visual pigment melanopsin. Those cells respond directly to the light stimuli. And then pretectal nuclei and suprachiasmatic nucleus, the fibers from the melanopsin containing ganglion cells project to the pretectal nuclei, which mediate pupillary light reflexes, and to the suprachiasmatic nucleus of the hypothalamus, which functions as the timer to set off our daily biorhythms. So as I looked into different eye diseases or problems, I came across a book published called The Genetics of Eye Diseases, and it helped to break down diseases such as ectopia lentis, which is the dislocation of the lens from its normal position when the lens displacement can be associated with various complications such as refractive error, diplopia, cataracts, leakage of lens proteins into the vitreous with consequent inflammation of the vitreous and the choroid. Displacement within the anterior chamber may result in papillary blocks or glaucoma. It can come from hereditary factors or secondary conditions including trauma, enlarged eyes, or cataracts. Right now, the treatment that was published, it just includes isolation or associated with systemic manifestations. Some of the most common things I think that we see when addressing our eyes are going to be the myopia and hyperopia. Myopia, commonly called nearsightedness, occurs when distant objects focus in front of the retina rather than on its. Myopic people can kind of see close objects without problems because they can focus on them on the retina, but distant objects are blurred. Typically results from an eyeball that's too long. Some treatments include laser procedures to flatten the cornea. It slightly offers other treatment options too. And then hyperopia is known as farsightedness, occurs when the parallel light rays from distant objects focus behind the retina. Hyperoptic individuals can see distant objects because their ciliary muscles contract almost continuously to increase those light bending powers of the lens. It kind of moves the focus point forward into the retina. But the diverging light rays from the nearby objects focus so far behind the retina that the lens can't find the focal point onto the retina, even if it's a full refractory power. It usually results from an eyeball being too short. The correction traditionally involves using concave lenses that diverge the light before it enters the eye. Glasses. Alrighty, and then moving back into another article that I researched. It was from the Indian Journal of Ophthalmology. They published an article discussing recent advances for retinal imaging for diabetic retinopathy and diabetic macular edema, the leading causes of blindness through the world, affecting at least 171 million people in the world, and is expected to increase 366 million by 2030. Diabetic retinopathy is a common complication of diabetes and affects advances in retinal imaging, such as recently. There is now ultra wide field color fundus photography and fundus fluorescein angiography. By demonstrating active leakage from microaneurysms, color fundus photography has established roles in screening for diabetic eye disease, early detection of progression, and monitoring of treatment response. The fluorescein angiograph detects areas of capillary non-perfusion as well as leakage from both microaneurysms and neovascularization. This kind of application of advanced retinal imaging will help to enhance our understandings of the disease progression and risk factors that allow ophthalmologists to optimize the management of patients with diabetic eye disease. Okay, and then as my biblical integration, I put in my 3 quotes. 2 Corinthians 5:7, for we live by faith, not by sight, meaning that as followers of Jesus, we are to center our lives around what we believe in, even though we cannot physically see it. And then I did Psalms 19:14. May these words of my mouth and this meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight, Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Meaning the Lord's always watching in the words we share with God in prayer and also the words we share with others. And then Proverbs 15:3, the eyes of the Lord are in every place and shrewd in their own sight, meaning there's no escaping the eyes of God. Just because we not physically see God does not mean he's not with us, nor does it mean that he's not watching us, what we do. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I have attached my references, and thank you for everything.